In the video of my preview of the season just gone, I said that the incoming manager, however good, cannot work miracles, but with his achievements over the last 10 months, maybe he's had a touch from the divine. Also, I said to revel in our victories and be understanding in our defeats. Looking back, that was some good advice. Like me, you must feel what a relief this season's accomplishments have been, compared to the disastrous campaign that preceded it. But the side has been transformed since the arrival of Erik Ten Hag, who seems to have, for the most part, fumigated the dressing room of hangers-on and toxic elements, and instead instilled discipline from the start and a positive mentality, generating high expectations. I'll speak about the boss in more detail a bit later on, but I always felt that when he was appointed, he'd laid down the terms of his management to the board as having complete control over transfer policy, signings, contract renewals, and exits of those players surplus to requirements. Also on the playing side, he enforced 5 rules on the squad in order to maintain his expectations of their commitment. Like Fergie, the Dutchman wants to be the club's benevolent dictator, that no one is bigger than him and it's his way or the highway. As fans, the majority of us went into the new campaign last August with immense trepidation, possibly more than we'd had in many years. The big question was, would it get worse before it got better? Regardless, Ten Hag was probably tasked by the board with minimum targets of securing European football, the Europa League or better, a good run in one of the cup competitions, a cleansed dressing room and improved performances on the pitch. So with the perceived goals and expectations assumed for the initial start of the new regime at Old Trafford, let's look at the transfer window. First, briefly, who did we let go? Well, the most high-profile departure was Paul Pogba, and for every red over 18 in both age and IQ, we were happy to see him finally depart, taking his unprofessional attitude and influence with him. Joining him was the man-child Jesse Lingard, and also the aging Nemanja Matic, Edinson Cavani, and one of my personal favourites who deserve better pros around him, Juan Mata. Finally, perennial pre-season performer Pereira also went on to pastures new. Our hunt in the transfer market was mixed, but I felt that Ten Hag gave the recruitment team his targets list. I never felt that the ones we eventually got, or the ones that we were heavily linked to, that they were thrust upon him, like clearly they were with Ollie. The main miss was Frankie de Jong, who had so many apparent quotes attributed to him that I don't know which to believe, but not having Champions League football makes the most sense. Of the ones who came in as a whole, they've been generally positive. Dutch fullback Tyrone Malacia was first in from Erik's former rivals Feyenoord. He entered Old Trafford with enthusiasm and sporting a big grin as someone genuinely delighted to be there. Christian Eriksen had a comeback season with Brentford, so much was expected after he signed. By the end of July, Ten Hag's former centre-back, Lisandro Martinez, became the first to join him from his old club Ajax, and despite not being built like Vidic, Stam or even Ferdinand, he came with a fearsome reputation and filled a gap that most Reds felt was vital to plug. Into August, and with already 2 games gone in the new campaign, Casemiro was a surprising yet expensive acquisition from Real Madrid, but was someone with a professional mindset, a winner who'd collected every club medal possible at Madrid, including 5 Champions Leagues. Finally, Antony came from Ajax for a reportedly massive fee. At this point, the only thing that worried me with him was his threat to go on strike and no longer play for Ajax in order to force a move through. From those transfers, with some positional issues in the squad addressed, it just left the attack in a somewhat worrying position. We had Ronaldo and Martial to choose from, and at a stretch Rashford. And with Ten Hag's expectations of high work rate and press, how would either the Portuguese or the Frenchman fit that role? Before I start reviewing the actual season and the player performances, there was actually a question hanging in the air. Would Harry Maguire remain as captain? The incumbent had a poor season the year before and he was off his game, which doesn't instill confidence. Anyway, Ten Hag played it safe by retaining his services. But, as I mentioned in previous videos, what were the alternatives? Based on the season just gone, no one. Only Bruno and De Gea had any kind of chance of relieving the incumbent of his captaincy. Starting with the league review, I'm not going to bore you with game by game look back of the season. I'll just give an overview of how it panned out month by month and the main points to take. Despite a decent pre-season on the whole, you'll find it hard to forget that the start of the season had more than its set of teething problems. Unable to fully exercise the squad of its demons, we started August with 2 straight defeats, including a 4-0 mauling at Brentford, with both games reminiscent of the worst possible aspects of the previous campaign. Martinez didn't look up to it and was heavily criticised by Scouse pundits. However, they were silenced as the Butcher earned a Man of the Match award in a fine win over Liverpool, where the 2-1 scoreline didn't do justice to the performance. Meanwhile, Ronaldo was already clearly not in the boss's plans, having only started one match. But it was the Dutchman drawing criticism from some ex-Reds who fully believe that the tail should wag the dog in the team, and the good judgment of the manager ought to be superseded by Ronaldo's record and legendary status, and the strategy should fit his game and not how the boss wants his team to play. Finishing the month with a win at St Mary's, it was a second in a run of 4 straight victories, culminating in the 3-1 success over Arsenal, which moved us up to 5th. The game, which heralded Antony's goal-scoring debut, was one where the match was much tighter than the scoreline made out, yet the fact we held on to the win was a clear sign that we progressed when compared to recent seasons. Antony became the first Reds to score in his first 3 matches. It'd be a hard act to live up to for the Brazilian for most of the rest of the season. In September, Ten Hag won the first of his 2 Manager of the Month awards, and Rashford won the first of his 3 of the Players version. Due to the death of Her Majesty the Queen, we had 2 matches postponed against Leeds and Palace, and that fortnight's break contributed to disturbing our momentum. Into October, and it was 2 steps back when we returned to action as we were outthought and outplayed at the Etihad in a 6-3 defeat. Ten Hag and the faithful were left in no doubt there was still a lot of work to be done. Sometimes it can do everyone some good to be brought down to earth with a thud occasionally, which seemed to ring true as we managed to remain unbeaten for the rest of the month, the main highlight being a 2-0 victory over Spurs, which may sound vanilla on paper, but is one of the side's best performances in years. However, what overshadowed that success was Ronaldo's refusal to come on as sub. Instead, he walked down the tunnel, demonstrating the fractured relationship with Ten Hag. This selfishness shows what the Portuguese was all about, and just goes to prove how right the boss was in having him and the club part ways. Now compare that to his national teammate Bruno Fernandes, who, as a regular starter, took the captain's armband off Maguire without it negatively pressuring his game. In fact, he thrived. The final game of the month against West Ham was another tight win and took us to 5th. We didn't look back and didn't fall below this position for the rest of the season. Another sobering kick up the backside was received at Villa Park as Unai Emery's side dominated us from the start. However, we ended up the league campaign in mid-November with a very satisfying injury time winner from Garnacho at Fulham, showing his grown maturity and worth to the senior side. Once the World Cup break came into effect, Cristiano Ronaldo found time to have a self-serving interview with Piers Morgan, declared that he would never follow through with his reported move to the Saudi League as he had so many big clubs interested in him, parted ways with United by mutual consent, went to the World Cup, was treated coldly by his former Red Devils teammates, scored a solitary goal, went out to Morocco, and in a 180-degree U-turn signed for Saudi side Al Nassr. After a club season hiatus of 6 weeks due to the World Cup, we were fortunate to have a few straightforward games to ease us back in. United finished the year with 2 wins and 2 clean sheets. Another victory against mediocre opposition, this time 3-0 against Bournemouth, saw us start the new year in fine fashion, but next was the return against Man City at Old Trafford. World Cup goalscorer Wout Weghorst was brought in on loan from Turkey, where he was already pimped out to play his club football for the season by his parent club Burnley. In the derby game, City went 1-up, but it wasn't the same old story. United showed great resolve. A controversial equaliser from Bruno was followed by a winner from the prolific Rashford. Around this time, there were at least a couple of weeks of title talk for United, alongside leaders Arsenal and newly vanquished City. Obviously, we know that it didn't come to pass, but this showed what a good job the boss was doing. However, the next 2 results were disappointing. An injury time equaliser at Palace from a free kick was a sucker punch, and this was followed by a last gasp defeat, this time at leaders Arsenal. Into February, Marcel Sabitzer was signed on loan as cover for Christian Eriksen, who had been injured in the cup match versus Reading. Further, we caught up with the games postponed due to the Old Queen's passing. We played the return against Palace just over 2 weeks after the Selhurst Park match, and this was followed by back-to-back home and away fixtures against second-tier preppers Leeds. We secured 2 wins and a draw, but should never have been 2 down at home to the Yorkshire club. In the Palace game, Casemiro was arguably harshly sent off. They saw him suspended for the next 3 domestic fixtures, and we really felt it. March was a short yet disastrous month. The humiliation at Anfield, where the home side scored 7 out of 8 shots on target, didn't reflect that up to that opening goal just before half-time, we were actually the better side and more threatening. The game against Southampton at Old Trafford should have been a revenge reaction to the Liverpool result, but Casemiro was sent off again. The same ref, Anthony Taylor, decided after VAR advice to upgrade his original choice of a yellow card. This meant now a 4-match ban for Casemiro. By comparison, he was never dismissed in his 336 matches for Madrid. This would put pressure on a side still very much in all 4 competitions, as the wear and tear on players was starting to show. On to April, and Newcastle got their revenge for their League Cup final defeat with a 2-0 win at St James's Park. The rest of April was solid as we pushed for that lucrative Champions League spot, hotly pursued by Liverpool Liverpool, who wanted to push us or Newcastle out of the top four. The only match we didn't win was Spurs away, which underlined our inability to beat any top side away this season. What's worse is we were leading 2-0 at half time and looking very comfortable. Into the last month of the season and standing in that fourth position, our hold on it looked to be slipping after disappointing back-to-back defeats to Brighton and West Ham. However, the last 4 matches of the season, with 3 of them at home, were all won fairly comfortably, which not only meant that Liverpool was sidelined to Thursday night football, but that we usurped third spot away from the Geordies. Ending the league season with 75 points, this was the same total we won the Premier League with in 96-97 and was a massive 17 points improvement on the last campaign. A third place in a Champions League spot is probably a lot more than most Reds were expecting. Onto our European campaign, and United had just about done enough to scrape into the Europa League and were drawn in a group containing Sociedad, Moldovan side Sheriff Tiraspol and the Cypriots Omonia. It started poorly as the home leg against Sociedad led to a 1-0 defeat off the back of initial indifferent league form. Winning the remaining 5 matches home and away, including in Spain thanks to a Garnacho strike, we were edged into second place, short of first by a solitary goal, meaning we had to play off against a Champions League reject to get to the knockout stage. That tie and that reject was Barcelona. However, we ended up deservedly winning the tie, but that doesn't tell the whole story of how we were the better side at the Camp Nou and should have won away. In the end, we went through 4-3 on aggregate. The third Spanish side we played were Betis, who were swept aside at Old Trafford 4-1, making the return leg academic. The most frustrating part of this taxing cup run was unsurprisingly a tie we succumbed to, leading 2-0 at home to our 4th Spanish opponents of the season, Sevilla. It was another game, one of so many, where we should have been 4 or more up by the time the wheels fell off. A loss of concentration for a moment by Tyrell Malacia led to an own goal and 2-1. A freak injury to Lisandro Martinez ruled him out for the last 6 weeks of the season. An equaliser came soon after that, and in the end we were lucky to hold on to a soul-destroying 2-2 draw. The return trip to Spain was always going to be a big ask against resurgent Sevilla, whose crowd were really up for it. An early combination between De Gea and Maguire led to a Laurel and Hardy-esque error, culminating in an early lead for the home side. A howler from De Gea sealed the tie and drew more questions over his future. Back to Blighty, and our impressive cup form this campaign yielded tangible results in the League Cup. There was only one Carabao Cup match pre-World Cup, as we struggled against Villa at home, but ended up turning the tables and beating them 4-2. 2 more Old Trafford ties, both against lower league opposition, were won by a comfortable margin. By the time we got to the semi, City, Arsenal and Liverpool had already crushed out, leaving a very doable semi-final against Nottingham Forest. That tie was won 5-0 on aggregate and set up a Wembley final with new money Newcastle. Regardless of the reasons, they didn't turn up to the party that their faithful had set their hopes on. A Casemiro header and a deflected Rashford goal, both in the first half, deflated the opposition, who feebly tried to strike back, but as the game went on, simply folded, and we took our first silverware in 6 years and made it 9 straight decades of winning a major trophy. Finally, the FA Cup was, as tradition, the last one to get going, and it saw us go all the way to the final. We managed to win 3-1 in each round up to and including the quarter-finals, with the last 8 itself being the most bizarre, with the match against Fulham devolving into an all-out war against the ref, with 3 red cards given after a penalty was awarded for a blatant handball on the line by Willian. Regardless, this led to a semi-final win on penalties, 7-6 against Brighton, that put us into the final against our City rivals, going for their tarnished version of the treble. It took us 12 seconds to go 1-0 down, and despite an equalising penalty, we were missing striking options and Martinez in defence. A goal after half-time did for us, and we laboured to a 2-1 defeat, albeit with a last gasp chance hitting the bar twice before the final whistle blew. Ten Hag took all 4 competitions seriously, rarely fielding less than his available first-choice 11. Losing the final was more than disappointing, but showed us something for the future. Ten Hag will always go for every piece of silverware we're playing for, and the tournament he'll prioritise most will be the one his side is playing in next. On the pitch, it's been a great squad performance, 3rd in the league, a trophy in the gaffer's first season, and the introduction of not only some quality, but also players who will run through brick walls for the boss, the club, and the fans. To put that into a bit more context, I asked members of my Gadabout United Facebook group what their expectations were of the coming season. Only 30% of my Facebook group members thought we'd win a trophy, and even more telling, regarding our league position, 65% thought that top 6 was the best we would do, and only 17% thought we'd make the top 4, which was the same number as those who thought we'd end up mid-table. There is of course room for improvement, however those green shoots of recovery seem to have viability, and this season was a great foundation to build on. However, clearly one of the biggest issues is the lack of goals. Our creative avenues have been fantastic, coming from a variety of players from intricate team moves to defence obliterating passes, but the finishing, apart from Rashford and Bruno, has been woeful and has cost us points and cup progression. This is one of the rare seasons we failed to even score 5 goals in a game. Also, Reds are split in the goalkeeping situation, but I'll talk about that more in a moment. The manager took over in May last year, and you could see from his demeanour and the fact that he wanted to get started straight away that he was all about the club. With the aforementioned strict rules in place, it instilled a different mindset into the dressing room that hasn't been there in years. There is one manager here, your job is to win football matches, and no one is bigger than me. We saw this when Rashford was starting to find his form, but was put on the bench for being late to a team meeting. There was no petulance or slagging off of the manager on social media or even leaks from the dressing room. Rashford took his punishment like a man, and fortunately for Ten Hag, came on and scored the winner against Wolves. The Dutchman hit all his targets and more so. He seems to have got the most out of players who were struggling for the last year or two, like Rashford and Shaw, and those who were considered unsalvageable like Wan-Bissaka, Lindelof, or a lesser extent, Dalot. That said, they were still underperforming players, but the Dutchman is only human. After a poor start, he didn't hide and was comfortable in being interviewed about the early challenges and worrying results. I also felt he handled the Ronaldo situation as well as could be expected. Pressure from the media and especially his ex-teammates nevertheless stood by his guns and had enough character not to be bullied into playing him. Reds of any substance backed the manager. Sure, we've had some unprecedented lows, but considering the point the club were at when he took over, it was bound to happen. With another transfer window and his targets achieved, especially up front, I expect even better, and more importantly, so will he. On to the player performances. Starting with the keeper, De Gea has had another uneven 10 months. Yes, he won the Golden Globes, which is remarkable considering some of the lows during the campaign just gone. But that also reflects defensive improvements thanks to the new regime strategy and incoming players. He has made some impressive saves, including a pen, and his one-to-one successes won us points. And I'm not from the Roy Keane, but it's his job, undermining the Spaniard's qualities. However, Keane is right, and not alone, in criticising the keeper for terrible gaffes and poor distribution. With over 500 games now in a United shirt, if De Gea hasn't sorted his feet out by now, he never will. I think he's done well, but whether he'll be Ten Hag's number one choice going into 23-24, if the Dutchman is half the winner I think he is, and is as ruthless as he has to be successful, I doubt it. Just a word on Dean Henderson, and he seemed to have signed his own P45 with his unnecessary and egotistical pre-season interview before his loan move to Forest. That's the kind of behaviour Ten Hag has been trying to expunge. Generally, the defence has performed very well. Obviously not across the board, but after some early teething problems and the occasional terrifying wake-up call, it's been good. New boy Lisandro Martinez, the butcher, has bullied and brutalised the opposition and has added a steely quality to the defence, solidifying a first-choice centre-back partnership with Rafael Varane. Known very well by his former Ajax, now current United boss, Martinez's winning mentality in the dressing room has been something sorely missed over the last half a dozen years or more. Rafael Varane still has question marks over his fitness, and I'll be hoping for more than his 31 starts he had this time around. His surprise retirement from the French national side, announced after the World Cup, will hopefully contribute to that. Covering for the absence of both, Victor Lindelof looks like a new man. Now he has some quality to play alongside, and even put the skipper down the pecking order. He looked assured alongside Varane and Shaw, and was even cool enough to convert the winning penalty in the Cup semi-final against Brighton. He's earned a lot of respect back from our fan base, and I fully expect him to be in Ten Hag's squad come next term. Harry Maguire, the captain of Manchester United, is now 5th choice centre-back, and despite being fit for the vast majority of the season, only made 16 starts in all competitions, with another 15 outings coming on as a token sub. The abuse he gets on social media and the lack of respect from almost all quarters, I'm surprised he doesn't want out, but from the last thing I read, he wants to stay and fight for his place. And if he stubbornly does stay, Ten Hag has to strip him of the captaincy. Luke Shaw has had a great return to form, with only the City and Liverpool debacles really showing up his lack of blood and guts when things are going badly. He's done so well that, as I mentioned, he is a preferred choice to the boss than the club captain in his unnatural position of centre-back. Anyway, there is still some room for improvement, but this was the Luke Shaw from years ago, and it was good to see. Just before the halfway point of the season, Wan-Bissaka got some game time and took the opportunity with both hands and turned himself from a fullback that most fans wanted out to one who evoked discussion as to who should start, him or Dalot. Again, he still has to cut out silly mistakes, but has almost certainly got himself in the manager's good books. And moving on to Diogo Dalot, the young fullback seems to have really benefited from his stint on loan at Milan last season, where he got a good run in the side. The 24-year-old has looked far more the part and, as just mentioned, will battle the spider for the right-back spot next term. Finally, Tyrell Malacia. The Dutchman has had some good runs in the side, starting 29 matches last season, but has been prone to some schoolboy errors and has been the least impressive of the players brought into the club last summer. He needs to cut out his lapses in concentration and improve his judgment. Onto the midfield, and Casemiro has really been the standout player in this area and the player of the year for many Reds. His composure and experience, his interceptions, long and short passing, his chipping in with vital goals and his unsuppressible passion has endeared him to the Old Trafford faithful. The 7 matches missed through suspension showed the cost of his absence for all to see. One of the players that impressed me for United last season was de facto captain Bruno Fernandes, who completed his best season at the club since joining. He took on his new unofficial leadership responsibilities well. He does moan too much, which can grate referees, but at least he spent a lot less time on the deck. However, his creativity, reflected in his assists combined with his goal scoring, was unmatched in the squad and by most of the league. We talk about Casemiro and Rashford as being indispensable to United's charge last season, but Bruno was equally as important. A leader, a creator, a scorer, a winner. Christian Eriksen had an uneven season, playing very well before the World Cup, although I expect him to get on the score sheet more. Like Bruno, he was a creative hub and worked hard, but was far more ineffective after his long-term injury. I'll be honest, I'm not sure whether he'll be a starter or a squad player during the next campaign. Fred ran, as he often does, hot and cold. Another uneven season for the Brazilian too, and once more, too many games passed him by. He scored his share of goals, but there was not enough quality in his play. He'll be on the receiving end of a big decision in the summer from the Dutchman. Scott McTominay played far less of a partner side than he ever did under Ollie, but did alright during his appearances thanks to squad rotation. Again, it could be bad news for the Scot this summer. Just a brief one on Donny van de Beek. I declared that we would know whether Ollie and Ralph were right or wrong with the arrival into the club of the man who made Donny the success he was at Ajax. And we got our answer. Overlooked in the same way he was before, a sad injury cut short his season, but I doubt he would have had that many more starts. He should be gone this transfer window. On loan, Marcel Sabitzer from Bayern had some good games after being brought in as cover for Eriksen. However, the boss has already passed on making his move permanent. Onto the wingers, Marcus Rashford. A lot of credit needs to go to the player and the manager for his 180-degree return to form this season and his 30 goals. The Manc became the 22nd Centurion at Old Trafford with his 100-plus goals in all competitions. Rash was indispensable in our cup runs and league form, although it seemed by the end of the campaign, the weight of being the main scoring focus had taken its toll as the goals dried up. The opposition needed other goal-scoring teammates to target, instead of knowing where United's main danger was coming from. On the opposite end of this was Jadon Sancho, needing several months to get his head together. When he did play, moments of quality were there, but few and far between. Whilst you can excuse his first lacklustre season being part of that dressing room, there's less you can defend about this one, seeing as we've observed great progress in previously poorly performing or even written off squad members. I doubt he'll leave Old Trafford this summer, but the young man's coming campaign will go a long way to decide his future at the club. Antony's the final newbie to talk about and he's not particularly impressed from what I've seen. He must be good if Ten Hag chose to bring him in. That said, despite some belters and the occasional moments of creativity, the cutting inside on his left foot to bend it into the far corners become far too predictable, far too soon. He is fast though and full of passion and aggression. We need to see more from him. Alejandro Garnacho made a big impression in his breakthrough season, scoring vital goals and playing with fearless energy and hunger. I really look forward to seeing more of him next season, and he could well be a first choice starter if he continues to develop and turn in more consistent levels of performance as he's been doing. Finally, a quick word on Facundo Pellistri, who, despite 1 start and 9 sub appearances, really piqued my interest. The boss knows best, but I don't think the Uruguayan got enough of a chance to show what he can do, and I'd like to see more of him next season too. I think he has a lot of promise. Onto the forward line, and there is little positive that can be said. Mason Greenwood didn't play all season for obvious reasons, which left us sadly deficient. As already mentioned, Ronaldo was a liability from pre-season to Piers Morgan pretty much. It's a credit to the boys that his behaviour didn't detract from our performances. However, he's gone to Saudi and now he's someone else's problem. But one of our problems is Anthony Martial. The Frenchman showed once again little of his quality and even less of his effort. On the rare occasions he was fit, he only seemed to be able to score open goals after good build-ups. That said, according to Ten Hag, he really rates him. Anyway, Tony M could be here come the start of the season, but it's now or never if that comes to pass. Finally, last and in many ways least, Wout Weghorst. Sorry, that's unfair, and it also isn't. The Dutch loanee put in 110% because he was just happy to be there. A lot of us defended the criticism of him by talking about his link-up play and pressuring the defenders before we collectively accepted, almost to a man, that he just wasn't a very good striker. Anyway, good for him. He got to be a United man, but less good for the rest of us in all honesty. Going into next season, what are United's expectations? In the league, after such a good finish, I believe that top 4 will be expected rather than hoped for. This will be tough as Liverpool and Chelsea have got every chance, along with the current top 4, of pushing us all the way. Depending upon the transfer window and the couple of weeks in January and February, I think a title challenge is still a little too optimistic, but Ten Hag has progressed so quickly so soon, who knows? In the Cups and the knockout stage in the Champions League will be the minimum requirement, with the quarterfinals or more being a bonus. Silverware is always desired by those within and without Old Trafford, and the Dutchman will not treat the 2 domestic ones lightly. As for this current transfer window, we have around £150 million to spend due to FFP rules which, unlike City, we adhere to. So unless we manage to get rid of those surplus to requirements, that's all we have to play with. It doesn't take a genius to state that we need at least one top-notch striker, that and a backup. As mentioned, another centre-back is on the radar, as is a midfielder with Mason Mount, as I record this, being a key target. The Dutchman may also want to have another go for Frankie de Jong, which could be an amazing acquisition or another embarrassing courtship. The other position we're looking to strengthen, if transfer stories are to be believed, is the goalkeeping situation. But that said, we will be linked with 3 or 4 dozen players at least until the transfer window closes, so take it all with a pinch of salt. So that was my review of the 2022-23 season. What did I get right and what did I miss the point on? And what did you make of the campaign? Better than expected or a missed opportunity? Post your opinions in the comments below and please like, share and subscribe. Thank you as always for your support.